All right, today we're going to trace the incredible journey of science fiction. I mean, how did it go from this tiny niche literary corner to basically becoming the language of our entire modern world? Well, believe it or not, you could say it all started with just one single sentence.
Just listen to that. That one line, it just captures a whole mood, right? A whole world, an entire aesthetic. It's a line that really did help change everything. And yeah, we're definitely going to circle back to it. But first, just the fact that a line like that exists in science fiction raises a huge question.
I mean, really think about it. How did a genre that was once dismissed as simple escapism become the very lens we use to see our future, our tech, even ourselves? To figure that out, we've got to go back to the beginning, back to a place they called the sci-fi ghetto.
So yeah, for the longest time, science fiction was kind of walled off from the rest of the literary world. It was in its own little neighborhood, its own ghetto, and it was known for being, well, pretty conservative, aesthetically speaking. It was written for the masses, not exactly pushing any artistic envelopes.
And you can really see the contrast here. On one side, you have sci-fi, which was all about these straightforward adventure stories. But on the other side, the rest of the literary world was deep into modernism. We're talking about the super complex, really challenging work of authors like T.S. Eliot and James Joyce. I mean, they were two totally separate universes. But in the 1960s, something started to change. A rebellion began brewing inside that ghetto.
And this was the new wave. It was this amazing movement of writers who were just tired of the ghetto walls. They decided it was time to smash them. And what was their plan? What was their weapon? They were going to import the really radical, experimental techniques of modernist literature right into the heart of science fiction.
And this rebellion, it wasn't just in one place. It was totally transatlantic. It was being championed over in Britain by this journal called New Worlds, but at the same time, American writers were on that exact same wavelength. You had authors like Philip K. Dick and J.G. Ballard, and they weren't just writing about the future anymore. No, they were completely reinventing how to write about it. They were using a style that was fragmented, jarring, and super psychological.
So you might be wondering, how did they actually do it? How did they create this feeling of a fragmented, chaotic modern world? Well, a key tool they used was a literary technique called parataxis. Now, it sounds complicated, I know, but the idea is actually pretty simple. You just place images one after another with no connecting words. It's like a super rapid-fire film montage. And the effect? It gives you this sense of alienation, of sensory overload, which, perfectly mirrored the crazy world they saw around them.
And if you want to see just how experimental these guys were, just look at J.G. Ballard's condensed novels. His process was wild. He'd write a whole basic story in one single long sentence. Then he'd break that sentence into little pieces, and then he'd build these dense, jarring paragraphs around each tiny fragment. And what you got was this shocking collage of surgery, violence, and urban decay. It was a completely new and powerful way to tell a story.
So at the same time, back in America, you've got Philip K. Dick, who was using sci-fi to ask these huge, profound, philosophical questions. His work was always digging into that blurry line between what's real and what's fake. I mean, think about it. In a world full of replicas, manipulative media, new drugs, how could you be sure of anything? These weren't just simple stories, they were full-blown existential crises on the page.
Okay, so the new wave, they put some serious cracks in those ghetto walls. But the movement that came next, the one that truly blew them apart, that was cyberpunk. This wasn't just an intellectual rebellion anymore. Oh no. This was a stylistic revolution, and it would go on to define the entire look, the feel, and all the anxieties of our modern technological age.
And look at that, there it is again, that line we started with. It's the opening line from William Gibson's 1984 masterpiece, Neuromancer. This sentence, this was the starting pistol for the entire cyberpunk movement. It just so perfectly fuses the natural world, the sky, with decaying technology, a dead television channel. It sets the stage for everything that was about to come.
Cyberpunk literally gave us the vocabulary for the future we were all heading into. It painted this picture, right? Gritty, rain-slicked cities, humans merging with machines. It explored that weird loneliness you can feel even when you're hyper-connected online. And it gave us the word, the very idea of cyberspace, this kind of consensual hallucination, a digital world we all agreed to plug into.
And the characters in Neuromancer, they basically became the archetypes for this new kind of alienation. I mean, look at this crew. You got Case, the cowboy hacker who's totally washed up. You got Molly, the street samurai, this bodyguard with surgically implanted mirrored eyes and steel claws. So cool. And then there's Dixie Flatline, who's supposed to be the mentor, but he's not even a person anymore. He's just a digital ghost, an electronic construct. There are teams, sure, but each one of them is just profoundly, fundamentally alone.
Okay, and this is where it all comes together. Because the ideas that were born in the new wave and then supercharged by Cyberpunk, they didn't just escape the ghetto. No, they completely took over the mainstream. The walls didn't just crumble, they completely dissolved into thin air.
You know, it started out as just a leak, a little trickle, but that leak quickly became a flood. All these concepts, these aesthetics that were once locked away in this little niche genre were suddenly everywhere. And they didn't just change our movies and books, they changed the very way we talk and the way we think.
And it's fascinating to see how this happened. You can actually trace the geographic center of science fiction as it moved around the world. So let's take that journey. It really began its march a long, long time ago in early modern Europe. Think about French satirists like Cyrano de Bergerac, who were using these imaginary voyages to the moon as a really clever way to critique their own society back on Earth.
Okay, so from France, the center then moves. By the 19th century, it's landed in London. Right in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, you have authors like the great H.G. Wells, who started grappling with the massive promises and the huge dangers of all this new science and technology.
Next stop, New York. After World War II, the center of gravity shifts again, right across the Atlantic to New York City. And this was the hub of that big American pulp magazine boom, the very thing that built the ghetto walls we talked about at the very beginning.
And from New York, it kept moving west. With the rising power of Hollywood, the center lands in Los Angeles. And it was here that movies like Blade Runner, which you might know was based on a Philip K. Dick novel, took that cyberpunk aesthetic and beamed it directly into the minds of a massive global audience.
And finally, our journey arrives in Tokyo. And what's so perfect about that is it's the very city where Neuromancer opens. Tokyo became this global hub for exactly the kind of technology and pop culture that really defines the whole science fiction aesthetic that we all know and recognize today.
And you know what? This cultural conquest, you can literally measure it in dollars and cents. Just look at this. By 1993, six of the top 10 highest-grossing films of all time were science fiction. And get this, that was before Jurassic Park came out and just leaped over all of them. The evidence was just, it was undeniable. Sci-fi was king.
So what's the takeaway here? It's that we all speak science fiction now. You do, I do, it's everywhere. It's embedded in our political language. Think about the Star Wars defense system. It's in our news. Remember when they called the first Gulf War a video game war? It's in the tech that fills our homes. It's in Nobel Prize-winning literature. It's in our biggest bestsellers. The stuff that was once way out on the margins has become the very fabric of our world. You know, it's funny. It's kind of like what Victor Frankenstein was always afraid of in that other foundational sci-fi story. The creation has broken free of the lab. The ideas that were once just confined to pulp magazines and weird experimental novels, they're out, and they are now shaping our reality. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most important question of all. If our world is now science fiction, if we are living in the future that these writers imagined, then it's not just a genre we watch or read anymore, is it? It's the story that we are all writing right now together. So, what happens next? Well, I guess that part's up to us.